Welcome back to another episode of The Football Chemist, where we use data to go through football's biggest talking points without boring or confusing you with all of that technical jargon. Conor Gallagher has just moved to Tottenham Hotspur from Atletico Madrid for a reported £35 million. The former Chelsea midfielder has struggled to find minutes, but will look to refresh Spurs' injury-hit and underperforming side. But why has he chosen Tottenham over other clubs? How will this affect Spurs' squad? And will this change England's 2026 World Cup squad plans? Let's get into it. So to start off with, why have Spurs signed Conor Gallagher? Well, the short-term gain is that right now they're really hit by injuries in their midfield. Players like James Maddison, Dejan Kulusevski and Rodrigo Bentancur are all out for a good few months. And even players like Lucas Bergvall are out for the short term. So the immediate gain that Tottenham will get by signing him is just an extra pair of legs in midfield. And especially since Pape Matar Sarr has been off at the African Cup of Nations, it might take him a bit of time to bed back into the side. But there is a wider problem with Tottenham's midfield, and that has been shown this season by their underperformance in the Premier League. When we look at their expected goals, what we can see is not only are they really struggling, they're 17th in the league, which is way below where you'd expect them to be. Having said that, they did finish 17th last season. But when we look at the individual players and how they are performing in XG, we can see a clear trend that Tottenham's midfielders quite simply are not getting enough goal chances. They're not getting into positions where they can score goals. And what makes things even more dire here is that they're also not getting into positions where they can create goals. You can see the two midfielders here highlighted in white are the top two midfielders for expected assisted goals this season. Both of them here are under one, which is quite simply not good enough. And while you are getting players outperforming this, like Sarr and like Bentancur, for both expected goals and expected assists, it's still not good enough to have these underlying numbers going forward. And the problem gets even worse when we dig a little deeper into the numbers for Tottenham's midfielders, because there's just quite simply a lack of dynamism in the midfield. Palhinha is not expected to be the main creator. He's more of the water carrier or the more defensive-minded midfielder if he's playing in a double pivot or even in a single pivot in a midfield three. And we can see this very clearly when we look at the carries into the penalty area among Premier League midfielders so far this season. No Tottenham players anywhere near the top 10. The highest we can see here is Lucas Bergvall all the way down in joint 34th on just 2. And whilst you could say that this is because Tottenham are more of a passing-based team than a dribbling-based team, this is quite simply not true. And this is not how Tottenham's attackers like to thrive, as we'll see later on in this video. And why can Gallagher fix this issue? Because quite simply, he's more of a carrier than a passer. Because when we look at his polygon over the last 365 days, firstly, he's got very strong defensive numbers, and we'll come on to that a bit more later. But when we look at his way of getting the ball forward, we can see here in the top right-hand side, where you've got the more passing stats, he's doing less well on this, but that's fine, because when you look at his carrying stats, they're some of the best in Europe's top 5 leagues. He loves carrying the ball forward into the penalty area, as we saw Tottenham are lacking in this. And he also loves to take on defenders and really drive at them, which is becoming more and more important in the Premier League this season. And this is more evident when we look at his stats at a glance. And as we can see here, his best stat in terms of percentile is carries into the penalty area. But then we look at the other high stats here, tackles in the attacking third, touches in the attacking penalty area. This is a midfielder who likes to get forward and he likes to really attack and is a lot more positive in his style of play than someone like Palhinha is. And so he'd work well alongside Palhinha and even someone like Bentancur. So having mentioned that, let's take a closer look on how he would complement Tottenham's other midfielders and really fit into their side. So I mentioned that he complements Palhinha and Bentancur well, but let's take a better look into this and let's compare their polygons side by side. So we've got Gallagher on the left here, Palhinha in the middle, and Bentancur on the right. And I've left the outlines of the other polygons to make this point a bit clearer. And the first thing to notice, which kind of proves what I said before, that Tottenham are more dribbling-based than passing-based, is that all three struggle in the passing stats in the top right-hand corner. But when we look at Palhinha and Bentancur, they're both doing very well in the more defensive side on the left-hand side, whereas on the bottom, where you've got the more dribbling stats, they're struggling a bit. And as you can see on the outlines, Gallagher is really compensating for that. And so between the two of them, if you take either Gallagher and Palhinha or Gallagher and Bentancur, you're getting a unit that performs on all levels. And you can even see these three playing in a midfield three. where you've got the double pivot of Bentancur and Palhinha, and then Gallagher just playing a bit further forward, but he can still drop back and provide that defensive side. So he can also work in a 3 alongside more attack-minded midfielders like Pape Sarr, or even in the future players like Maddison once he does finally return from injury. And I mentioned that Tottenham are looking for a dribbler rather than a passer. And this is because when we look at their strikers, namely Richarlison and Dominic Solanke, these are players that prefer players who dribble rather than players that pass. Because when we look at their polygons here, especially looking in the top left-hand corner, which is kind of how the players like to receive the balls to create the chances, you can either get them receiving the ball through passes, receiving the ball through crosses, or them receiving the balls themselves through interceptions. Both Richarlison and Solanke do well on the aerials and the interceptions, but they really struggle on progressive passes received. Solanke in particular here was in the first percentile, which is not as good as it sounds. It is the lowest of the low. So he really does hate receiving passes. So he would thrive better if a midfielder was driving the ball forward and then he can pounce on the second ball, for example, and that's how he gets his goal, or through more straightforward passes, because a progressive pass has to be at least 10 yards. So we know Gallagher's good. We know he'll bring a lot more attack-minded nature to Tottenham's midfield, but is he really an upgrade over Pape Sarr or Lucas Bergvall? Let's compare them side by side so that we can really see this in depth. So let's start with the attacking stats, because that's mainly what the midfielder is going to bring to Tottenham's squad. And we can see here, I've given 2 versions of Gallagher. Gallagher this season, who's played fewer minutes, and Gallagher last season, who's a bit more active in the Atletico Madrid side. But the picture is the same for both of them. When we look at how they're getting the ball forward, especially carries into the penalty area, which I highlighted, but even things like take-ons, he is clear of Bergvall and Sarr over both seasons, really, most of the time, in having these creative stats. So it looks like a no-brainer that Gallagher is just an upgrade on Bergvall and Sarr. And that's no surprise, because he is a few years older, he is more experienced, and also he's played at the top level. Let's not forget that this is a guy who is regularly starting for Chelsea just before he went to Atletico Madrid. So he knows what to do in a top Premier League side. And he's got the edge over them going forward, but he's also got the edge over them defensively. When we look at the key defensive stats, tackles, blocks, interceptions, clearances. I mean, Bergvall's got the edge over them all on clearances, but other than that, Gallagher is just quite simply the better defensive option. And this is really key if Thomas Frank wants to play a midfield 3 and is just thinking a bit more defensive minded. Perhaps he's against a bigger side or a side that's attacking them more. So he just wants that solidity. And so having a player like Gallagher, who's this versatile, is really useful to have, because he can jump forward, bring the ball forward, but he can still drop back and make sure that he's contributing to the defence too. So we know why Spurs chose Gallagher, but why has Gallagher chosen Spurs? So even though Gallagher has eventually signed for Tottenham, he was heavily linked with Aston Villa, but Spurs managed to hijack the move, despite the fact that Villa are doing much better in the Premier League, they're higher up and have got a much better chance of being in the Champions League next season. We know that Gallagher was a big fan of Thomas Frank, but there are other reasons why he's chosen Spurs, and the big one is coming up this summer in the World Cup. In the 6 months ahead of any major tournament, all of England's players will be jostling to try and make sure that they're on that plane to go to the tournament, and Gallagher will be no different. And over the last year, Thomas Tuchel has selected 5 squads, and Gallagher has fallen out of favour. And so getting back to playing regular minutes and in the Premier League will be key. Because when we look at some of England's midfield options here, I've taken out players like Rice and Anderson and Bellingham, who I think are near certain to be going to the USA if they are fit. When we look at the other options, we can see Thomas Tuchel will probably pick 2, maybe 3 of these players. Henderson looks nailed on. He's been in every single squad and he is in excellent form for Brentford. And then it's a bit of a toss-up between the other 4. You'd imagine that Wharton would have a very good chance if he's fit, and there'd probably be a third midfielder. And I think Gallagher would back himself to give him that opportunity over Loftus-Cheek and Scott if he's regularly playing in the Premier League, because he has really struggled to get regular minutes at Atletico Madrid. When we look at the percentage of minutes played versus minutes missed that Gallagher has had in the league over the last 3 seasons, we can see the decline. In 2023-24 for Chelsea, he was one of Chelsea's regular starters. He barely missed a minute. Then when we get to 24-25 for Atletico, it became a bit more 50-50. And now this season, he's actually missing more minutes than he is starting. And this is a real problem when he wants to put himself on the spotlight and really shine. If he gets more minutes for Tottenham, he gets more of a chance to shine on the pitch, Thomas Tuchel is more likely to take notice and he's more likely to be on the plane for the World Cup. Because another reason why he has moved to Tottenham back in the Premier League is because he'll get greater eyeballs here, especially from the manager. Because when we look at Thomas Tuchel's squad makeup, generally speaking, not too many people outside of English leagues get a call up. You can see the number has slowly declined over the 5 squads that he's picked. And when we take the most recent squad that he picked, those 4 players outside of English leagues were Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham, who are nailed on certainties because of just how good they are. Marcus Rashford, who's got extensive Premier League experience and only moved away from the Premier League this summer. And Jarell Quansah, who, same as Rashford, only moved away from the Premier League this summer and was already in the squad before that. So he was not picked from outside of the English leagues. Gallagher coming back into the English leagues now gives him a better chance of getting selected, especially if he finds his form at Tottenham. Now, it's hard to tell whether this move is more important for Gallagher or for Tottenham. Tottenham need midfielders, Tottenham just need players, and Tottenham need the feel-good factor, and Gallagher will provide a lot of this. But Gallagher also needs a confidence boost to make sure that he's getting into the England squad, because when he is on form, he is more than good enough to be part of England's squad at the World Cup. He's got the tournament experience, he played at Euro 24, and he also did go to the World Cup in 2022, even if he was an unused sub. As for Spurs, not only does he give them short-term cover for injuries, but he also gives them versatility moving forward. Bentancur and Palhinha are more defensive-minded midfielders, and then Sarr and Bergvall are a bit more inexperienced and will take a bit of time to bed in. And so Gallagher is this perfect transition player who does all of the jobs well, more attack-minded, but can still chip in with the defence. And also just in terms of the short and medium-term gains, Tottenham might be in the bottom half of the table here in a pretty dire-looking position in 14th. But when we take a look at the top half of the table, they're actually only 6 points off 5th, which should get a Champions League spot this season. And what this table also shows, if we look on the far left-hand side, or if the arrows between 5th and 10th, it really shows how close this table is, how much can change. And if Tottenham can go on a run of form, and at the moment that is a big if, they could challenge for European spots or even the Champions League. So what do you think? Is Gallagher a good signing for Spurs? Are you a bit surprised that he chose Spurs over Aston Villa? Do you think that he deserves a place in the England squad? Let me know what you think in the comments below and give this video a like if you've liked what you've seen. Also, feel free to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this, and give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok for some more short form and behind the scenes content. I'll see you next time.